So good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Collecting Cars. I'm saying it's good evening because we've had to wait for our friend in California, Spencer Trenery, to join us from Fantasy Junction. We've got Edoardo Schön in Milan from Rosso Corsa and James Cottingham from DK Engineering, who's got a lovely background there. Well done, James, for superimposing yourself in there.
It isn't actually too far away from my office. It's just a different angle.
So this is the first time we've had 4 people on one of these Zoom calls. And I was chatting with James at the beginning of this week, talking about getting on a Zoom call and thinking about doing something a bit different. And James said we should do a Zoom with some people from different parts of the world that are in second generation family businesses. So here we are, as I say, Edoardo from Rosso Corsa in Milan, Spencer from Fantasy Junction, just over the bridge from San Francisco, and James just outside of London at DK Engineering, and me in central London, who's actually a bit of a fraud because I'm third generation and I'm not actually in the family business anymore. So we'll come on to that. Anyway, welcome.
Thank you, Edward.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Spencer, on my screen, you're at the top. So do you want to just give us a little introduction of Fantasy Junction and when it started and your father?
Sure. Yeah, my father, Bruce Trenery, started Fantasy Junction, and he did so in 1976. And it stemmed from originally just a pure enthusiasm for the cars. And in the late 1960s and early 1970s, he was trading in cars that weren't of substantial value at that time, but interesting to him while he went to school, put himself through college. And then because in the state of California, for tax reasons, really, you're discouraged from trading any car for profit, even one car, without having a dealer's license. He was kind of shoved into forming a dealership. And then when he married my mom, she further encouraged him to have a reputable business. And so in 1976, he rented a space for 12 cars and 2 desks and started Fantasy Junction. And then in 1989, we moved into the building that we're in now, which houses about 55 cars.
And your next door neighbor is Pixar, right?
It's true, yep. So they've been good car people. I can look out and see the Pixar gate from where I'm sitting here right now. We've done some small amount of business with them, interesting cars, Messerschmitts and other micro cars. We haven't been selling them a lot of really high dollar items, but they're very good custodians of the neighborhood, and we appreciate having them. And they have a car show once a year, which has become a very big deal. That's very well attended and often includes the unveiling of some new model by Tesla or someone. I
think the last time I was actually at your showroom was with James, and it must have been 3 years ago already now, which Spencer at Pebble Beach week, the car week.
Sure,
normally
yeah,
the Monday after the auction, we head up to San Francisco and have all the cars are cleared out, and we have a dinner in this beautiful building they're in.
It's funny because I haven't been for a couple of years, and actually just this week I've been looking at flights for Pebble this year in the hope that it happens. And I've made my flight back on Wednesday just to make sure I can go to all these parties again. You know, it's having not been last year for the first time in such a long time, you really realize how much you miss it. I think actually last year I was quite glad not to go to Pebble Beach, but this year I'm ready to get out of here.
So
yeah, if they have it, we'll have the dinner.
Yeah, okay.
we'll come back on to Spencer in a minute because I as I'm sure all of us have, you know, Fantasy Junction for a lot. You know, they're one of the most respected classic car dealers in the world, and you, Spencer, you really do trade all over the world, don't you? And both their descriptions are always very, very detailed, and their photography is equally very, very detailed. So if there's a car you want to buy over the phone with your friends in California and feel totally comfortable that car is going to arrive with you as they said, then Fantasy Junction's always been that business to do it with.
Yeah, thank you, Edward. And never before has it been so important either.
Exactly. Yeah.
Less foot traffic.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to that in a second. Edoardo, give us a little rundown of Rosso Corsa.
Rosso Corsa started in Italy, and like all the Italian stories, it's quite romantic and passionate. Because my father, that knows well James' fathers, started to collecting cars since when he was young. So he has a big passion of it. He works for 25 years after studying in fashion, because my grandmother has a fashion brands in Italy, but known all over the world or almost. And then he started to collect cars. Then when Capaldi is the famous dealership in Milan, got problems, fiscal problems in '94, he bought the company. So he started with a Rosso Corsa. So to be honest, he started not for business, but he started for passion and for trying to save something that was historical for Milan, for Italy, but not just for Italy, also for, can say, Europe. Though then we always keep this as a family business, and for sure we see very different ways of business, because it's okay with new cars, but also with classic cars. Ferrari in this occasion, the clients are changing a lot, and it's nice also if the generation change, because I see that now some of new customers prefer to speak with me instead of my father, or some other customer prefer to speak with my father, but not for experience or ability, but just, for different view and different way to collect cars and to also restore cars. Anyway, the business is made by passion and first, that is the most important thing of us, but we grow up a lot in the last years. Also with this COVID that unfortunately makes a lot of problems for other business, and it's a tragedy, but in this case was quite good too. Sure, some effort, but not like was the idea in the beginning of big problems. And we see that I think we changed more in the last 6 months instead of the last 20 years. Because you see now online auction, but I think we will talk about this later. So I'm happy that me as a son, me as a little child that grew up in the middle of red cars, now not just play in use cars, but also do business and make some profit, but not profit as economic only, but also as company, few people, and everything in this world, because I love it, to be honest. So when people say, what do you do for work? I say, nothing. I love what I do. So I don't want to say it's work. Yeah, it's work for other reasons. That is good. So
good. Well, so one thing that ties all of us together, and because of our similar age, and the market's become a really over the last 10 years is a very global market.
Sure.
One of the cars that shone through the increase of let's call it the investment era in cars was Ferrari. And I say that because obviously we have a Ferrari dealer in Italy. Over Spencer's shoulder, we've got a TDF by the look of it. Is that a single or a 3-louver car?
Single louver 1031 TDF.
Okay, and then obviously DK Engineering, the F40 Kings or Queens. Is it Queens or Kings?
Yeah.
I think Kings for now will do. And, and I think you've forgotten the McLaren F1.
I could just show these 3 cars if it's okay.
Oh, yeah.
I think, Ed, you've forgotten the McLaren F1, because that links you, Spencer, and I quite closely, because very, very vividly doing the deal on 28 and flying and having the phone call when I was literally at the airport at Amelia Island and changing my flight to go to San Francisco for 12 hours. And I always remember being so impressed with Spencer, because we went to go and see the car, and on the way back to the shop, he was like, "I've just got to stop and see this car, and I've got to stop and see this car." Yeah, and I was like, "But this is," I don't know what language to use, but I was like, "This is not the sort of car I'd expect you to be stopping and getting excited about buying." But there you were, doing a deal at the side of the street, because it is so different over there. That doesn't happen over here anymore. That whole sort of collector's car scene, because the weather's so good all year round, and it was just.
That's right.
That whole story is one that sort of lives in my mind and my memory as quite an experience, and doing that deal.
It does just show you such a global business, because there we are with Spencer in California dealing with that. I think there was a friend of ours that was involved with some other cars in Germany.
That's right.
An English friend in Switzerland that says you need to get on the phone to Spencer because he can do something for you. I was in Megève at the time. Doing it, and I do remember, James, you changing your flight and getting up to San Francisco, and for this highly valuable car, couple of calls between 4 or 5 people that all trust each other. Done, bang, bang, bang. It's easy as that when you know each other and trust each other. It's
great, and just so far in the stories of the different businesses, all of us, all of our fathers know each other as well, and have done so much business in the past. Eduardo's father and mine have had lots of 50 Sports Ferrari experience, and obviously the 250 LM, which he helped us so much with when we had that, and with the history, and obviously with Bruce, we've done so much business. And obviously your father, you know, Edward, who, as I said to you the other day, the sort of small twist of fate, our family comp Daytona, that we bought it from the guy that had it for 40 years, and he bought it from your dad back in 74. So it's, you know, it's all such a small world, isn't it?
I think we've still got the Lola T296 Spencer that my father bought off you 20 years ago now.
Is that right? Yeah, which you raised a bit, I think.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So anyway, James, we don't want to dodge over the famous F40 King. So
everyone knows.
Give us a rundown of DK, unless you've not had it rammed down your throat.
No. Yeah, very much a family business. Very much like the stories we've heard so far. My parents were car people originally. You know, Dad was a research physicist for Kodak, but had lots of works, Jaguars in the main, in the 60s. So he owned one of the factory lightweight E-types, low drag E-type that ran at Le Mans in 65. He owned in 69 and had lots and lots of works XK120s. So when you read the books about all those famous Jags, you know, he had those. And it was a bit of a hobby business. And with Kodak, they had a very good facility where staff could go and, you know, do bits and pieces, almost like a fully functioning workshop. And he used to buy cars one week, do them up, you know, over the course of the week, and put it in the exchange and mart the next week. And come the mid-70s, Mum and Dad just decided that they should start a business doing it, because they were making more money in their free time than they were at work, so to speak. And that's why it's DK, David and Kate, DK Engineering. And very quickly, pretty much the first year of business, they realized that there was no one else specializing in Ferrari in the UK apart from David Clark, who became Grapehall Motors. So not the David Clark we all know associated with McLaren's, but another David Clark, who later became Grapehall, the main dealer, but at the time he was David Clark Engineering, I think. And since then, it's just been everything Ferrari. And the last 10 years has seen huge growth in the business. And our philosophy has been to sort of provide the complete service. So whether it's restoration to the highest level, sales of modern Ferraris, you know, over 7 years old, that is, up to, you know, $50-60 million cars, if that's what needs to be bought or sold. It's just everything, and it's storage, it's service, it's sales, it's the complete package. So we've sort of carved out that niche, and we've got great relationships with all the other dealers around the world. But I truly think that at the moment we're probably the only people that do provide that level of service across the board to the extent we do. And to that note, we've got sort of 350 cars in our care at any one time, which is quite daunting when it comes to doing the insurance renewal. But it's true, you know, and you see those numbers, and it's quite scary. But yeah.
So one thing? So obviously we're all second-ish, third a little bit generation. That's not because of my age, by the way. I'm third generation. It just happens to be it is third generation. What one obviously massive change for us all is that the cars that our parents loved and traded in back in the day, you know, they weren't really investments. So, you know, they were great cars still. A lot of them weren't in the same condition and kept up to the same order they are today. That, you know, you probably didn't need to go and sell your house, your wife, and your children to go and buy one. But, you know, I don't know, for the three of you, looking at some of the cars behind you, which are all cars that your parents would have bought back in the day to get their businesses going. Were they expensive cars at the time? You know, was it a sort of life-changing amount of money to go and buy those types of cars to go and either restore or sell?
So, Ed, I can remember that when I was a kid living with my parents, my dad had bought the most beautiful 275 GTB 4Cam, and he spent $80,000 to do it. And it was the stunner of all 4Cams that he had up to that point in the business. And he came home and proclaimed to my mother that he was going to keep this one because it was just so good. And after about 2 weeks of not being able to sleep at night because it was some multiples the value of everything else in inventory, which was consigned and owned by him, and basically amassed most of his net worth into it, he couldn't sleep correctly. And my mother ordered him to sell it because he was just an aggravation around the household. So while $80,000 today for a 275 GTB 4-cam does not sound like any money at all, and certainly a restoration of one would be many multiples of that, I would say that in that time, 1982, 83, that was a huge amount of money when corrected for the time value. You know, it really was a lot of money for high quality stuff, but a lot of the cars that went through our doors were not necessarily restored to a high level. And I think that is one major difference, and one reason why the values have grown for the cars is a lot more has been expended to keep them into the condition that they're presented in today, or bring them to the condition that they are in today, versus what they were in the early 80s. You know, in the early 80s, we had a lot of Ferraris that were painted with a brush, you know, like you would paint a house.
And matching number was not a problem at the time.
Not a problem. Yeah, nobody checked. Nobody checked.
It's not a problem now, by the way.
Well, I think you used to sell cars based on their merits, whereas now I always think you sell cars based on their lack of negatives. So if you've got a car that ticks every box, it's an easy sell, and the less boxes that are ticked, more difficult it becomes. Whereas in the past, it was just
I'm still here, by the way.
In the past, it was just always this is a car with great history, and it did this race and it had this accident, and it was owned by this person, and that's what got people excited. Whereas today is, if it is all matching numbers, original body, has less negatives, less reasons for other people to sort of say that your car's not as good as theirs. That's what people are looking for today, which is a huge change. But as you say as well, I'm amazed that the cost of restoration actually hasn't gone up more, considering the values have gone up so much. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've seen, Ed Wood's platform be so popular as well, is that I remember over the last 3 or 4 years at the back of these auction rooms, we all, as dealers, we stand at the side or at the back of the tents at the big events. And we've been discussing for 4 or 5 years that the commission rates have just got, because they've stayed the same and the values have become so high, that they've just become extortionate. Everyone beats us up on commission rates. And that's why your platform, Ed, I think, is doing so well, is because you can actually sell a £500,000 car for a relatively low amount. It's just a different process, because obviously you're not buying from collecting cars. But it's been really interesting to see the way that the values have grown so quickly, yet the restoration costs haven't gone up as quickly, and the commission rates haven't reduced because the values are so much higher. It hasn't been proportional.
So with those values in mind, what do our fathers all think? Because it's funny, I have some, we were trading quite dynamically at the start of this big boom and buying short wheelbases, McLaren F1s, etc. And for reasons I won't go into now, I left the business. And when I left the business at the time, that the confidence of that keeping going left from what we were doing. But I have some funny conversations with my father now, and he's still got a stock book of back in the 60s and 70s of when he was buying Dinos for 28 grand and selling them for 50 quid profit, which was how they did it in the day. But we talk about something like a 500 Superfast, and it might be a $2 million car now. He's like, I can't get my head around it being a $2 million car. And the reason there are only 13 of them is because they couldn't sell them when they were new. And we used to call them the 500 Super Slow because we couldn't get the things running properly. He struggles to get his head around some of these huge values that we see now. How's that reflected?
You're totally right. I mean, my dad, he's just always excited about 50 sports Ferraris, always. And I have to say to him, well, actually, if we put the same amount of money into a Mercedes CLK GTR, we could probably sell that sooner for more easily without as many questions and for a bigger profit. And he can't get his head around it. And as soon as the CLK GTR's in the showroom, he's like, please, when is that sold? I'll be so happy when it's sold. But he's more than happy to keep the 50 sports Ferrari of the equivalent value for 3 years because we can't sell it, because we can't quite get the Class K certification over the line or whatever it might be. I mean, it's just he can't get his head around that these modern cars are so valuable now. But it probably is because of the shift that you've mentioned before. But I don't believe that there isn't enough room for all these different generations of car to still have huge value, because there are many more collectors and that motor car is only 100 years old. So there's different segments being created.
And Edoardo, with one of another thing with Ferraris that we've seen over the last 10 years is the Massini report. And when you get your hand on a Massini report for a 1960s Ferrari, normally at the top it was delivered to Italy. In many cases, you say, hey, it was delivered to this city in Italy, and then from Italy it normally went to America back in the day. So say that again.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not so different than today. I mean, at the time, Ferrari was less for sure. Now Ferrari makes the 55% of the market in the US. So now US is the main market for Ferrari. At the time, the main market was Europe, and Italy was not the main market, but all the friends of the family Ferrari at the time, or then Montezemolo too, or whatever in the beginning, was a different relationship, but now Ferrari just selling cars. They're doing a lot of, for example, limited edition cars. They're selling cars in a very democratic way. So if you are a good collector, it doesn't matter if you are Mr. Number One or Mr. Number Zero, and doesn't matter if you have billions or if you have enough of money, but you have to be a collector. At the time, for sure, Ferrari was more familiar, let's say easy, on the given cars. So maybe the most strange cars, important cars, and maybe some of this was delivered to Italians, France, UK, German, but this was the main part, also the States, but that was after. So Ferrari, yeah, the Massino report is very nice because, as we spoke in the beginning, it has trust. That is nice that we know each other, and some of our fathers know each other since a long time. Massini is for sure trusting of a report because it's a good way. But a story of a car, it's important, but more important is the condition of the car. And for sure, Massini report can be made 2 years ago and can come from Italy, the car, and can be fantastic. But in these 2 years, everything can happen.
Yeah.
So.
But I guess it must be because you are the one with from the motherland that when you see all these cars around the world, there's a bit of a shame the cars are not with you, and I know.
Unfortunately, Italians doesn't pay a lot of cars and doesn't spend money on cars for restoring. That is our problem. So when somebody else comes and offer more than an Italian, we are not seller, but we sell.
No, that's true. But what you need is more Emanuele Cuolos working for you, because whenever there's a car in Italy still with its original black Italian plates, Emanuele refuses to sell it to anyone outside of Italy because he doesn't want the plates to be lost.
That's true. Fortunately, now there is a new law comes since a month that we can ask back the black plates on the cars. So that will be useful in a couple of months. So if some Italians
let me text Emanuele now.
Exactly, text to him that the value of black plates now is not anymore like yesterday.
Yeah, Kidston sales numbers are going to go through the roof now.
No. For sure, history is a very important thing, but on a very important car. And sometimes history can be fantastic, sometimes no. But the car, for example, I found a very nice 250 Cabriolet that we are restoring, and the car was sold in Italy at the time. And it's a nice story because when we got the car from the customer, the car for sure was not in nice condition, and there was two huge holes like these air plugs in the like a California longer days.
Yeah.
And the door open was like of the 166 Ferrari, and he was thinking that was something made at the time, completely crazy with no sense. But with the knowledgeable of Ferrari, of the big archive, that Ferrari is the only factory in the world that has a real archive, because you can see also the notes of the driver at the time that was testing the car. We saw that the customer, that was a very important Italian, very important family in Italy, he ordered these two special plugs for the car. And that makes like a one-off of the time. That now one-off, it's a term that is used well in the new cars. But at the time, one-off was not, some people doesn't want to ask more than what they had. Some yes, but not often like today. That today only, if you see all the brands make only limited edition cars or like one-off cars, millions, millions and millions. But at the time was different. And for sure, that is nice to see, nice to find. I think Ferrari helps a lot in this, for sure. It's not easy to have contacts. It's not easy to have a relationship, because also for us sometimes is difficult. But yes, finding some cars that was sold in Italy at the time with very special specification, Italy sometimes makes you very special surprise during the restoration or finding cars. Or I think there is a lot of cars that still in the barn find in Italy that are unknown. Also because we have problem that everybody is scared if you sell a €5 million car. What's happened to you the day after?
Yeah.
You know. So maybe you are in a little country somewhere else that nobody knows that.
Yeah.
Or sometimes there is no.
But I mean, but we've all gravitated to Ferrari over the years because it is the premier brand. You know, when they were 2 years old, they did something that no one has done since. Obviously, it's not possible, but they won the Mille Miglia and Le Mans in the same year in '49, and ever since then, they had only built 15 or so competition cars by that point. Ever since then, they've been on the map, and everyone's seen them as the premier brand. And as a result, everyone's written about them, documented the cars. And that's why the 50s and 60s especially, everyone knows exactly how many cars were built and what specification they were. And there were so many different individual cars. It's always been an exciting brand. And that's another reason my parents moved away from Jaguar, is because it was just straight six engines, very similar designs. Whereas Ferrari had these 4 cylinders, 6 cylinders, V12s, Lampredi, Colombo, different coach builders, with Touring, with Vignali, Scaglietti.
Yeah,
it's always been an exciting brand, and only the Italians can provide that, I think.
It's changing.
What I saw between my point of view, that we got a lot of more value of the car, got a lot of more new buyer of cars all over the world, young buyer, not just collectors, but we lost a little bit of romanticism between that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But touching on something I said earlier, you've highlighted that there are a lot of new buyers, but the guys that used to buy cars haven't gone away. And as long as they haven't got off the merry-go-round, so if they've sold a big car that they paid 100,000 for 30, 40 years ago and sold it for 5 million today, as long as they still keep 50% at least, in the market buying cars, they stay on that merry-go-round, and then there's all these new buyers. So I really do believe, in recent years, a lot of people have said, what do you think about these 60s cars? The younger guys, they don't want them, but actually, I think they grow to want them. It's just they have to get the initial bit out of their system first. And I think there's, when people ask me, how's the classic car market? I immediately answer, well, which part of it? Which segment are we talking about? Because today it's not as simple as the classic car market. It's, are you into modern classics? Are you into the hypercars? Are you into the GT1 cars? Are you into 60s cars, 50s cars? There's so many different brackets, and it's high time that someone really made an effort to just actually categorize all these different types.
It's the collector car market, isn't it? It's not, we vintage classic is not really, it's so important now. And there's a lot of people that have quite a broad spectrum of cars in their collection. One thing Edoardo just said, which leads us, we can talk about the future, was again, reading some of those, or actually not reading the Massini reports, but I like it when you describe in Italy that, this car was built for a very important Italian family. You don't really need to say anything more than that. And it leaves this sort of intrigue about the car. When we wind the clock on 50 years from today and a 488 Pista is offered with 2 purple stripes down the middle and lime green interior, how are they going to describe the buyer of that car when it was new? As this important family, this important YouTuber from...
I guess drunk.
Still are desperate to be different. That's the thing today.
I'm not going to make on a car like this in Ferrari. I'm going to refuse the car.
Rosso Corsa will.
No, I tried Rosso Corsa. Yeah, it's selling. It's one of the biggest dealers in the world. We're selling around 200 and more cars a year. New cars, I'm talking about.
I quite like purple.
Yeah, so to 20 to 30, depends years and models and special edition and whatever. But we really try to support customers for choice. Also because remember that except special cars, but if you sell a car today, you have to consider that this car maybe you have to buy tomorrow. So if I do a purple car with the yellow stripes, what I do when the customer said, okay, I want the new model, I tried in this car.
I think you might need to move to America, Eduardo,
Yeah.
because there's some Ferrari,
I-
Ferrari dealers out there that or some customers that could do with
I
your
love
advice.
America. I love America, but I love more Italy.
Just to touch on something earlier, the reason that there might be barn finds still coming out of Italy is because no one at Going Motor Cars speaks Italian. Boy, they're just pulling him out of America at a rate, and I can't believe what Peter finds in terms of stuff stashed in the bushes. I don't know if you follow his Instagram.
How does he do it?
It's unbelievable. The guy works incredibly hard, but he's also very lucky.
No,
And,
for those, Spencer's just mentioned the name Peter. This is a guy called Peter Kumar who owns Gullwing Motor Company in New York. And if you go on his website, you know, he finds things and drags them out of barns all over America.
We can say he has
incredible.
a diverse stock.
He does, but when you find that dream car in England that's out of 40-year ownership, the car normally works. In America, Peter finds things in a barn in the Midwest out of 40 years ownership. I think a DB4 Series 5 this week.
That's right.
That thing is not running.
No, that's correct. I mean,
and his asking prices are normally more than what a restored one would be.
Well, they don't
And he
last
gets it.
long.
They
Yeah, he
don't
gets
last
it.
long.
He
I know.
gets it.
Normally, if you call up when you wake up in the UK and he's put a car on the site overnight and you call up,
Yeah, that's true.
we're just taking a deposit on that one.
That's right. Yeah.
You know,
So,
guys,
guys,
today we have a lot of new different ways to sell. And this is one that we're using. Now we are talking each other between a screen, like if we are all together in the same living room. And consider our father to do that was impossible, no?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
They use fax, they use telephone, and maybe
Yeah, yeah.
telephone doesn't work always. Email was starting when we was young, but I remember the connection of the computer. Every time you spend like 20 minutes for sending an email, you know.
Yeah.
So now maybe if you use this Instagram, Facebook, and whatever is coming now, TikTok and TokTok and whatever is, that things helps a lot for selling because people doesn't read anymore too much. But maybe sometimes if they see something, for example, barn find we're talking about, they are more excited for that instead of a big report or a certification or something else in the beginning.
Yeah.
So this is changing also for this new method of sale because now online auction, it's more than other auction for COVID for sure. But do you think the auction company goes back to spend €2 million to make the auction in London with champagne and whatever, after that they make the same result spending maybe 50,000?
No. And to be honest with you, the champagne was running out before COVID, so I'm not sure we can put this down to COVID. James,
Yeah,
what do you think?
But the profit is the same, as 12% remain the same. So that's the problem.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a conversation that Ed and I have had at the back of a couple of the big auction house tents in the States for a long time. Is that these rates, these commission rates? I always thought that an auction house should probably show on the screen what it's actually going to cost you all in if you put your hand up there. And then it got to the point where it's getting so complicated when you're working the currency and not these big numbers that if they wanted you to bid, you didn't have enough time to work it out. But the COVID has forced that change, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. Certainly, the human interaction is missed, and people are, even here in England, we've had a couple of lockdowns now, and being a garage, we don't, we're not forced to close, but we haven't had visitors. But every now and again, you've got people that are busting to just come and look at cars. They really want to come and look at cars, and people will revert to that, but it'll be more of a blend, I'm sure.
One thing I would say is that obviously I'm not going to sit here and because this is not about collecting cars in the auction house. We are one way of selling cars, and Eduardo, you're right. There are many ways to sell cars today on listing it on mobile.de or using Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Sure. However, there are some stars in our arena that continue to separate themselves from the rest, and the fact that the four of us are talking here, Spencer's business in many ways hasn't changed a huge amount, has it, Spencer? However, you've always been at the forefront in how you show off a car, and as I said, you almost haven't needed to change because the quality in which you display a car is always been very, very good.
So thank you, Edward. And the internet certainly helps with that, right? In previous decades, before I was active in the business, it was about taking 12 5x7-inch printed pictures of a car and mailing them to someone to try and get them interested in an automobile. And it took a week to get the pictures printed. It took 3 weeks for the pictures to get somewhere. And then maybe the customer would call you back and express some interest in the car. We're fortunate in this area because there's a tremendous concentration of interesting cars in the Bay Area, in Northern California, also Southern California. And that's kind of what James was alluding to, that when we went to buy a McLaren F1, on the way back, we just happened to stop roadside and try and buy an XK140 drop-in. And the cars are able to be used. They don't deteriorate because of the weather, and the international residents here in the Bay Area brought a lot of interesting cars here. And so the cars were physically in our area. What Fantasy Junction was maybe unique in the 1980s is that we had a showroom of 55 or 60 cars physically here. That was very unusual. And finding and having access to the car was much more important in the 1980s and late 1970s and even early 1990s than it is today. Today, you can go on Barchetta and find out who used a 340mm for the last 10 years in various motoring events, who did the Mille Miglia, et cetera. So it was unique in the 80s that we had all the cars, that we had access to the cars, that we could create good photography, good descriptions, and promote them. And finding the car was hard. Today, I think matching the car with the interested party is the challenge. And that's really a major shift. And, in the 70s, it was just, in my observation, a handful of enthusiastic people that were really players in the world. It was 12 people: Albert Gugesberg, Jeffrey Pattinson. These guys were the major players. And today you have Sports Car Market Letter and Octane and tons of magazines and everything that people are placing classified ads in, and that just didn't exist 30 years ago.
But I mean, also touching on your point about Peter Kumar, you said, if you follow him on Instagram, well, so we all know that he's got that Aston Martin within an hour of him telling everyone, however many followers he's got. Whereas, I know in the 80s, my father spent probably 2 weeks at a time, 3 or 4 times a year in California, pulling out 50 sports Ferraris and buying for $100,000 a 121 LM or a 500 TR or something that needed a restoration project, and getting them back to the UK and restoring them. Today, he was the only guy that knew about them from over here in Europe because he was making the journey to go and meet these guys, and managed to buy all the ex-Paravano parts, in one big foul swoop. But today, it would just be all online, and there'd be 1 million people, or not 1 million, but 100 people interested in these items and bidding for them. That's, I think, a big reason as to why the values have increased so much over the last 15 years is the accessibility of the potential buyer. Your platform to sort of putting the car in front of people is not just putting a monthly advert in Classic and Sports Car. I can have a Zagato Aston Martin turn up here today, have it photographed, launch it tomorrow on Instagram so that everyone that follows me, I don't actually have to put it in front of them. It comes up in their feed, and then they can go on the website, and we could send out a newsletter blast via email. You could just get it in front of 100,000 people in 48 hours. As you said before, you couldn't do that. You had to post it. You had to have people come and see you, call you, do whatever. It is, that's why the values have gone up so quickly, because there's so many people that would say, I would have paid that. Well, then, okay, then maybe we could have a bit of a bidding war here to a degree. And that's why the values went up so quickly. And we saw such a big problem in 2016 when the cars were put into auction with a reserve, a net reserve, that was higher than the equivalent model, like a 330 GTC had sold for at the previous auction, because the owners were assuming that actually the market, was going like this, so that they're putting it up here because it should get to here, and then suddenly the music stopped. And I think we were lucky with COVID that we'd had a bit of a price adjustment situation for the last 2 years up until the end of 2019, so that in 2020 everyone had already taken a bit of a pill and understood we'd had a hit. But
guys, don't forget about art. because if there is people that are able to pay 80 million euro for a paint in the wall, that I'm not saying nothing. I love to art, but I'm not like in cars, but I love to arts. So why? And there is much more arts instead of cars, and cars are much more technical instead of arts. Why doesn't have to be in the future somebody that wants to put an F40 LM on the wall just for that reason, because they like it?
They could well do, and I think actually in certain parts of the world that will be the only way you'll be able to use your car.
No, I agree, but the problem is that now we are moving. Unfortunately, if you see in Milan is less, but in Munich, in few cities, the cars for sure will be always much more difficult to use. Now in Italy, the classic cars that makes pollution is always a problem. So for sure, cars has to move also in this way.
Yeah.
Because consider to put a short wheelbase in the middle of a living room, it could be also. So that's
I was having a joke with someone about Pebble Beach in 20 years' time is going to be out of Azerbaijan. It'll be the only place you can.
Pebble Beach. How many kilometers you do in Pebble Beach by your car? How many meters? You know. So okay, Mille Miglia, it's Evans. So I think the moving could be also for Evans' car, for art, for money are growing, rich people are growing, investment are growing. Classic cars is one of the biggest investment in the last 30 years, instead of all the other things. So for sure, a customer will come, but will change. Like I think the customer that our father had on the 60s, 80s, 70s doesn't exist anymore, or the last remain are very, very little part of the new customers. Unfortunately, because I like to make my hands dirty on an engine. I don't say that I'm able, but I like to try. Yeah. And the problem is that the new people prefer to look reports, prefer to look certification, prefer to look history, instead of saying, I want to drive the car. I want to see how the car feels.
That's fair, but I think James has seen, and you can.
I'm talking in 20 years. I'm not talking now. Huh?
Yeah, the eclectic mix of cars behind you, James. You know, you've been exposed to some customers from all over the world now, and not only the wealth is changing and coming from different areas, but the way those people are spending money, they don't buy the cars and they have a different relationship with the cars. So you sell a McLaren F1, the first thing he wants to do is get some plates on it. We're driving it. And you know that's also changed.
That's good.
Yeah, I think we've seen this sort of coffee culture grow a lot more, and I think probably where in Spencer's part of the world it's been going on forever, and it's just the same as ever. But for us, this whole notion of having somewhere to go and drive to on a Saturday for everyone to meet up and talk about cars, I think is a relatively new thing. It used to happen in the past, but not on the same scale. And it was people that were taking part in concours events and race meetings. But now people will just meet up to talk about cars. And we have a couple of venues here in the UK, and I'm sure we'll have more soon, where people just go to. And there's that great place, great name, Caffeine and the Machine, where it's just an old pub that people go to because they know other people are going to go there who like cars. And that's it. If you don't like cars, you don't go to this place. And I think events like Goodwood and all those events that are really
helps a lot.
Have really helped people actually say, actually, cars aren't that nerdy. They're pretty cool.
For Evans, I agree completely.
Yeah, but we should talk about second generation businesses a bit more instead of actually selling cars. And I'm interested to know, did any of you guys have a job elsewhere before the family business?
Well, I've done that. So I left school.
I mean, we know you've had a million jobs, but
I know. But I left school and I got straight into washing cars and getting in the paint shop, in the parts department, in the workshop, in sales. And normally it lasted about a year or so until I had a big family fallout and then got kicked out to go and do something else for a while. So I worked for an estate agent in London. And then I went back again to do the same thing. So was that something that your father said? Hey, Edward, you can come into the family business, but you've got to start at the bottom. Yeah, that's exactly how it started. Yeah, and actually, to say I got kicked out was wrong. I think people would like to dine out on that. But I at the time I was working in the business, I was living at home, and it all got too much. And my father said, "Look, I think it's time for you to go and get a job somewhere else and see what it's like working for someone else. And I started working for Foxtons in London, the estate agent that's owned by John Hunt, a famous car collector now. And yeah, I've been in and out of the business, and which for me, I don't regret any of it. It's meant I've been exposed to all sorts of different people and ways of life. I've lived in many places around the world, and I've enjoyed that. And to be honest with you, that's what's brought me to collecting cars. Wouldn't exist if I hadn't stood at the back of the tents with you, James, and traveled around the world and seeing how the market is changing in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
I started selling Subaru. Okay, that was not a family business, and for almost 1 year. Then it was nice, but
was that at the time when Subarus were really cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
With the STI comes, the VRX and other cars, so it was quite fun. But selling is different between driving. But yes, not out. And then I moved to my business that I made my own business that was a personal concierge for 4 years. And I made quite nice things, but by my own, with my money, with my things. For sure, helps from the family, but it was not a family business. It was my family, my business. Sorry. Then I moved back to Rosso Corsa because growing up, some experience around. So yes, I didn't start in the family business, but I was always near to the family business because family is one, passion was the same, so. Business is business, but if you have the family that works in the same passion and makes the main things for the moment in the same family, for sure you have to follow that in a point or not. But seriously, I start after 4 years of experience outside.
Edward, I grew up on a big.
And I didn't start from the top. Huh? I start from selling cars. Then moving other things, then going a little bit on. So I didn't start for sure, not also from zero, but not from 10. I start from a point that was good for my experience at the time, that was almost zero. But yes, I learned much more in this instead of for sure starting from zero. But Italy, it's different.
Good for you.
Yeah, but it was a choice of my father and mine together. It was not a choice of him or me.
Yeah.
And I think that was quite important because I'm not about learning of cars, but about learning of life, to be honest. And I appreciate now that I'm a little bit older than at the time. I'm going to appreciate a lot what was the choice of the time. So if I have to replay, I'm going to make exactly the same what I've done. So I'm quite happy for it. I can say that I'm happy for that.
Good for you. And Spencer?
Yeah, so I grew up on a big piece of property out in the country. And so what we had an abundance of was firewood. And so when I was young, I would split and stack and sell cords of oak firewood, which I would say was really my first job. And probably I was never in better physical shape than having done that for 3 or 4 days a week. But on Saturdays, I would always come to the shop with my dad, give my mom a break. Of course, at a young age, I was detailing cars, and that's kind of how it starts, I think, for a lot of us. I had some other odd gigs along the way. I had a little business that cleaned, I had converted a carpet cleaner to clean people's interior, steam clean modern cars. And I had a friend that had a company that did setup for catering events and so forth. So we moved a lot of tables and chairs around and so forth. But at an early age, I was here at the shop. I was detailing cars, and then that changed to photographing cars, and that changed to taking customers for test drives. I took a stab at trying to be a professional race car driver, which
I was going to ask that. So how many years have you been at Fantasy
short-lived.
Junction? How many years have you been at Fantasy Junction then?
So 23 years now. Yeah. But
do you still race lots? Because that's another thing. It always seems to go hand in hand. Like second generation. I don't know, Edoardo, if you've done any racing, but you always see the sons of these car dealers always go racing as well. Like it seems to be a thing.
It's about the most exciting corner of the profession, isn't it? And I think we've been fortunate to have been immersed in a lifestyle where there's a lot of really cool equipment around, and have been fortunate to have the opportunity to drive it.
I think
And
the thrill's very similar, isn't it? I always think that the thrill of racing is quite similar to doing a big deal.
You know,
You
the
know,
problem,
sure, yeah.
the problem of mine that my father raced a lot. So, you know, going racing today and eating all the pasta that I eat is not easy.
All the entertaining you do, Edoardo, in Milan. That's the problem.
It's not, and now for sure, now the cost of a racing is much more different than a time, because at time I remember that he was saying, I'm going to, he told me that he take the Mini Cooper of his mother and to make the Monte Carlo rally, and he gave back the car after the Monte Carlo, and she spent an hour and a half to make 35 kilometers. But because the third gear was at 45 kilometers an hour, so he didn't change the gear. That was the problem.
It was brilliant.
My father. Sorry,
Yeah,
carry on.
No, I mean, at the time, racing was different than today. Today, you have to be first able, then you have to spend a lot of money, you have to invest a lot of money. We have a racing department too, for new cars, not for classic cars. But, you know, it's cannot be just in sport, like in hobby, like was at the time, maybe, that was more easy, more gentleman driver. Yeah, I made few historic race, but it's not, I mean, there's not racing. Racing, it's more, now it's totally different. It's different rules, it's different.
Absolutely,
the philosophy is different. If you break something, and you have to be able, and the competition is different. So to be honest, I love to, but I'm not in for the moment, and because it's I don't think I'm so able like you know, other people of my family, like my father, for example. And so then it's not something that makes me crazy about racing. I like more to drive the cars, maybe fast, yes, but racing is not my my perfect match with a car. That's what I want.
James, what about you? Have you always been in the business, or have you left?
When I was at boarding school, the first thing I do when I came home would be go outside, because at mum and dad's house, we've got lots of cars stored there as well. So I'd always go outside and go and sit in the race cars and see what was new, and was always excited to go to the office and see what restorations were going on. So I've always had a huge interest in it, but was always determined to go and do something else. And that's probably, from my gap year onwards, I did work at DK, and I've been on the payroll for 20 years next year. But I did do, I went to university, did 4 years at Bristol, and got a master's in mechanical engineering, and was determined that I would go and do something else, and perhaps work in Formula One or work for ProDrive. But 4 years of engineering at Bristol made me realize that was not for me. And I actually, amazingly, I always have this funny sort of look back with Max. I went and had a job interview with Max Girardo in 2007, asking if I could come and work for his newly formed RM at the time, Europe office, because it was just him and one girl at the time. He said there was too much of a conflict of interest, but they'd give me a job in Canada, which I turned down. And then the farm where our business is now, we bought in 2007. So I project managed that for a year, with still the ambition of going to work for someone else afterwards. But as we all know, 2008, 2009 was pretty tricky. So I sort of stayed here, and the rest is history, really. So I did want to go and work somewhere else, but I never really had a proper job elsewhere, which...
Okay, James, you can come and work for me for a bit. I'll give you some work experience.
Well, you keep offering me a job, but...
if you want to come in Milan, you're more than welcome. Huh?
Yeah, I should do a sabbatical.
They need some car cleaners. I'm sure Spencer could do with the odd driver to help shuffle some cars about.
There are plenty of options, aren't there?
Spencer, you said that you were on the weekends, you were detailing some cars. And one thing I'll never forget when working at the family business Mercedes dealer at the time was getting in the UK, we have new registration plates that used to come out on the 1st of September every year. So a lot of cars get delivered in July and August, and then people wait until the 1st of September to take delivery of their first car. So during my summer holiday, I helped clean the cars for delivery, and someone gave me a windshield wiper to take the water residue off the top of the car. And I didn't realize that this windscreen wiper wasn't the one I should have been using. So this brand new car had scratches everywhere. This was before the days of Topaz, PPF and detailing. But yeah, I wasn't very good at washing cars, obviously.
And mistakes,
Sometimes people do that on purpose, though, don't they? They just
mistakes have a lot to grow, huh?
Yeah, for sure.
Much more than experience sometimes.
Now, guys, I'm going to have to cut this short because we've already been an hour. This has been really good, and I think we should do it again. I think there's quite a nice theme here of taking people from around the world. But as we had to wait for Spencer to get out of bed this morning in California.
Yeah, sorry to hold everybody up.
No problem. I've got 5 minutes or so, but I've got to go and attend to my 3 little rascals at home.
So quick fire, guys, and especially this is more relevant to Spencer and Edoardo, in terms of COVID and what it's done with regards to your father's involvement in the business. Because I've personally, in the last year, I've really, whilst I was taking the reins already, I've really had to take the reins of the business. How's it affected you guys in terms of how much more you've had to, or how much less your fathers have done, how much more you're doing now? Has it had a big impact on you?
Yeah, so on March 16th, they ordered us to close, and this is of last year, and we did so, and basically remained with a very abbreviated staff here until October 1st of last year. And Bruce has not really been here physically since they ordered us to close. And just yesterday morning, actually, he got his first of 2 vaccines, and he went immediately up to the track. Yesterday afternoon. But I suspect that after he gets his second dose, he'll probably be in the office a little more. It has been, there's been more of me taking on his customers in person, where people that might have come to visit with him to talk about a Type 57 Stelvio Bugatti and go for a test drive in it have been meeting with me. And he's been, I've kind of directed more of the email inquiries and some more phone inquiries for consignment and sales his direction, because he's mostly home and has the ability and time to do that. And I've been doing a lot more of the physical operational stuff here at the office. But we've been by appointment, and it hasn't been that we're overrun with people trying to come and see us.
I mean, certainly for the last 5 years, I've listened to my father saying, I want to spend more time away from the office and more time at home. And 3 months into the lockdown last year, I went to see him at home at distance. And he said, I'm so bored, I want to come back to work. And I said, Dad, all you've done for the last 5 years is say how much more time you want to spend at home. And here you are forced to stay at home, and now you're complaining. But I think, going forwards now, he's definitely settled into a routine of less responsibility and doing what he wants to do. Just taking on the projects he wants to be involved in and closing his door, so to speak, on the things that he doesn't want to be involved in. So I think it's been a good thing, because especially when it's your business that you set up, Mum and Dad have definitely not wanted to let go of the reins completely, whereas they've been forced to this last year. I think it's been really good for them. But how about you, Edoardo?
My father, I had your same problem. He always said I want to stay 3 months somewhere else, 3 months another way, holidays or whatever. And I was thinking too that from the lockdown, he was saying, okay, maybe, I take this excuse to stay more relaxed. Every day he was calling me. Saying, are you going to office? Yes, okay, I come to office. See you in office. We have lunch together. Yes, okay, we have lunch together. So that's I think it's impossible. It's like a lion, no? Like your father, the same. So you cannot put them in a gate. That is impossible.
I always joke that whenever they went on rallies or holidays in the last 5 years, that I could literally count that on day 4, 9 a.m., I'd have a phone call from my father to say, what's happened? Because I hadn't called him. He was worried that there was a big issue. And I was like, nothing.
No, he still won't involve in everything. He still comes often in office, for sure a little bit less, but anyway, he still wants to involve. He call the business is followed between me and my brother. So he calls me sometimes, my brother a few times, so depends about what's, but he's absolutely updated about everything. And he's in the countryside, but he's in 40 minutes from Milan. So he's come often in the office, and he is, I think, like 4 or 5 days, 4 days a week in office, almost every day. But because he really loves to, for sure, is his company, so that is important. But plus, he's very involved in cars, not just in the business of Rosso Corsa, but in all the other business together around. So yes, it's I'm happy for that, because to be honest, he's for sure older than me, but by mind, he could be sometimes younger than me. And I think, I think the business, but the business in what he do helps a lot for that. And I'm very, very honored to say that he's with me together, and he's still learning me a lot of things. and that is absolutely unique, and we're, I think, very lucky for that. Because yes, it's COVID. A lot of people lost a lot of family and fathers or whatever, grandfathers, or I mean, a part of the family, and that's for sure. It's tragic. But if you see that and you are lucky to be with your father and with your family together, that's, I think, it's today the most richest things, to be honest, to have today. And if you also put that together in a business, and business made by passion, I mean, I'm more happy today, to be honest, between the relationship of my father than before, because yes, I saw that he understood about his fragility for the virus, not for other reason, and but he still keep going, and he is very strong, and he really likes that. Nice.
And what about your father, Edward? Is he? Do you know? Has he?
I know. I do. Of course, I know. Yeah, he has definitely taken a step back from the business over the last year. I think he's thoroughly enjoyed lockdown, and I think it's removed the pressure and the need. Because I'd be totally honest with you, the reason I'm not in the family business is because when I moved back to the UK 4 years or so ago, with the plan of me taking over the family business, it was very clear he wasn't going to step aside and let me do that, and I wasn't prepared to try and manage a business that I wasn't allowed to manage, and it just didn't work for me. And actually, COVID would have helped, because it would have demonstrated I could have got on and done what I wanted to do and make my stamp on the business. But that's probably changing now. But that business is with 950 employees. It's quite a different business. You don't make your own decisions. A lot of the decisions are made by the manufacturers, Edoardo, as you probably know from Ferrari. And when you're having this coming from Jaguar, Land Rover, Aston Martin, BMW, or you don't really you're not in control of your own train set anymore. And I don't think that's anything. Spencer and James, you definitely wouldn't want to be involved in that business when you have the freedom
more freedom
to do
than us, guys. You have more freedom than us.
Say that again, Spencer.
I'm blissfully unaware.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a comparatively small operation.
We do what we like.
Yeah. Well, look, we'll definitely do this again, and we should maybe get some more faces on here. But make sure you check out fantasyjunction.com and on Instagram, probably at Fantasy Junction, DK Engineering, and Rosso Corsa. We'll make sure when we put this film out that all of your social channels and websites are there for people to see. But guys, thank you so much.
Thanks for including us.
Thank you, guys.
Friday afternoon,
Thank you, guys.
Friday
Good
morning.
to see everybody. All right, stay
later.
safe.
Hope to see you soon. Bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.